So let's look at this. What I wanted to show you was, where did it go? Talked about the Oracle of Delphi, and I wanted to show you something about that. And learned a little trick. I worked at Google for a little while.
You did?
Yeah. Let's see if it still works. Look at that, man. See that? Puts it all at the bottom. Oh, you can't see it anyway. Let me try another trick here. Okay. Yeah, that little floating toolbar thing kind of gets in the way. Yeah, you just put it down there. Okay. So, Greece. So I did I told you I had looked at this 96 miles to walk from Athens to Delphi according to my iPhone maps. If you put it on walking, 1 day, 9 hours of walking. Not sure if that's straight through or not, but you could walk it in 33 hours. Probably a 3 to 4 day journey, because the only time that the Oracle was receiving these messages from Apollo was in the summertime. And so you can imagine that things get pretty warm in Greece in, say, June and July. So it was a real pilgrimage and kind of a sacrifice. And again, this is not Socrates going there. It's his friend going there on his own, not even with Socrates like, yeah, go ask him that. I can't, I'm too old to walk that far. No, it wasn't like that. He just did it. And so walk this long walk to get to Delphi. Here's a little bit of what's left. If you go there today, you see the part of the entrance to the temple that was once there. Used to be a whole, I'll show you in a minute, kind of a whole city, or a little, not really a city, but a whole, pilgrimage spot here built for the people who came. But when you got close to the temple, to the entrance to the temple, there was this inscribed on one of the walls. It says, "Heed these words, you who wish to probe the depths of nature. If you do not find within yourself that which you seek, neither will you find it outside. If you ignore the wonders of your own house, how do you expect to find other wonders? In you is hidden the treasure of treasures. Know thyself, and you will know the universe and the gods." And this term, know thyself, is one that Shakespeare uses later. Where does he use that? Is that in Hamlet or Macbeth? I can't remember. But that actually becomes a really important part of this. So here's the I'll show you this in a minute here, but know thyself, yes. So in the fourth temple at Delphi are written these certain maxims, we'll call them, or little short little maxims, would be like short little phrases, of, I don't know, not necessarily of encouragement, but almost like commandments or something, of how people should conduct themselves, ethical maxims, I guess, useful for the life of men, inscribed by those whom the Greeks say were the sages who came to Delphi and dedicated to Apollo the celebrated maxims. Things like know thyself was one of those maxims. Another one was nothing in excess. So, everything in moderation, so that kind of thing. But there are other little, actually really useful sayings. Nothing that would be controversial or anything. They're pretty straightforward. So here's this says know thyself here in Greek, and then that's the translation there. All right. So these four virtues, prudence, courage, temperance, justice, you would have been met by all this as you approach the front of the temple. And these were the sages, and one of them is Thales right here. How do you like that? There's Thales. And the others here, these are the people who said these, spoke these maxims. Here they are. I know it's kind of hard to see because it's small. Honor the gods. That's good. Control the eye. Care for your parents. Test the character. Give timely counsel. Yield to justice. Give back what you have received. Act quickly. I love this one. Know what you have learned. Heed the law. Pray for things possible. Does that mean don't pray for the impossible? Maybe. I don't know. Pray for things possible. Repent of sins. All right. Consult the wise. Help your friends. Follow God. It's a tough one for me. Accept old age. Yeah. This one I really like. Be superior to anger. And nothing to excess. That's the other one. All right. So you would, as you're walking up, you would have passed all these kind of wise sayings, kind of preparing you mentally for your encounter with the Pythia or the prince or the priestess. So this is a famous painting here of this Lycurgus here consulting the oracle, and the Pythia, what was this priestess was named, speaks then, of course, for the god Apollo, and we talked about some other references to this in history. So here's what this little area would have looked like back then, and you see they have a theater, everything back here, and temple, and all these other places. Probably had hot dog vendors and T-shirts and all that too. Yeah, you know, people making them money. Here's what it looks like from above. Here's the a temple of Apollo right here, the theater. Of course, this path that would have taken you up to the right, all the way up here. So as you came into Delphi, or this part of Delphi at least, it would have wound you up the side of this hill up to the entrance to the temple then. So good. Again, that's what it looks like. That's what's left of it today. Well, here's the secret behind, oh, there's the theater, by the way. Apparently nothing's playing right now. Coronavirus, you know. They need to weed eat this theater, I think. Or get some of that weed be gone stuff. Doesn't look like they've had anything performed there for a while, but okay. All right, so here's this kind of a cutaway version. You see into the ground here. Here's what really happened. What we know today really was going on. I hate to be the one who, well, I'm not the one who does this, but telling you. So underground, there was a fault line, and the fault line ran right underneath the Temple of Apollo. And that fault line allowed, there was actually two fault lines, and this fault line allowed for certain gases to be released into the temple, inside the inner sanctum of the temple. And that's where the Pythia went to commune with Apollo. So you have all these ways that these gases can be released. You can see underneath here, there's kind of a confluence of the two fault lines. And the Pythia, by some accounts, this is the kind of a famous painting. This is what people, but by some accounts, though, there was actually kind of a well almost built up. So there were stones that were laid, you know, in a circle that actually kind of ascended to a smaller opening. So a well would kind of be straight up, you know, like a traditional kind of above ground part of the well. This kind of ascended almost like a circular pyramid-like thing, but there was still an opening on the top. And she wore this, you know, a headscarf, and she'd put her face over the opening to this thing that went down to these fault lines, and then she would throw this kind of hood or this scarf over her head in order to kind of trap, she didn't know that, but to trap these gases that were coming up out of the ground. And she would just breathe deeply. Yeah. And apparently, if you did that, you're getting a mixture there of carbon dioxide and methane, and all of us would see visions of Apollo or whoever you wanted to see. I'm not encouraging you to do this, but so when she came out of the temple with an answer for somebody, she came out with this, dilated eyes and kind of crazed look on her face and a woozy. And of course, everyone's like, oh my gosh, she's been in the presence of Apollo. No, she just inhaled a lot of methane and carbon dioxide. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it kind of takes the romance out of the whole thing, really, unfortunately. But that's what's going on. That's her connection to the divine. She was just kind of stoned, and prophesied all kinds of things. Somehow, though, with Chaerephon, she tells, yes, Socrates is the wisest man. Maybe it's towards the end of the day and she was kind of tired of making up riddles and stuff. I don't know. But so there you go. The truth behind the Oracle of Delphi. Sorry, I feel like I just told you guys another secret after I told you Santa Claus wasn't real and all that. So, what? Yes. All right. Okay. Look at that. Not everybody wants to stare at that for very long. Okay. So I'll back up a little bit to show that to you, but we already talked about that. So we were talking about Socratic method last time. This is an old movie. I saw that it was on Prime or Amazon Prime. It's a movie called The Paper Chase. Anyone seen that movie before? The Paper Chase? Yeah. Well, if you're thinking about going to law school, maybe take a look at it. It's a good movie, but it's an older movie too. But in the movie, the professor is really a pretty rough old curmudgeon professor, been at Harvard forever, had been considered for Supreme Court justice a couple of times, that level of intellect. And he teaches a contracts class for first-year law students. And it's funny, the opening credits of the movie shows the class like filtering into the classroom on the first day. It's kind of an auditorium classroom. Shows them all as the credits are rolling, and eventually by the time the movie starts, the classroom's full, and the professor walks in and says, introduces himself and says, I'll be teaching this class by the Socratic method. That means you'll prepare and I will ask you questions until you don't know anymore. That's what I explained to you guys. Well, so as the movie goes on, I would say there were probably 100 people in the class. And as the movie continues on, you notice that each time they meet and show us classroom scene, there's like fewer and fewer people in the class. It was kind of a weeding out class. If you could survive contracts with this professor, then you maybe were okay to go along further in law school. But I mean, by the end of the movie, there's like 35 people or so left in this class when they started with 100 or so. All right, Socratic method. We talked about all that though, didn't we? And in the end of the method, tell me if I mentioned this or not. I'm sorry, the class is confused. About that they kind of come to an agreement, talk about it more later, right? What really goes on, that sounds kind of like gentlemanly at the end. What really happens is that because that more than likely in most cases a crowd is kind of gathered around and is listening to this discussion, and Socrates was a physically very unattractive person. I'll put it very nicely, and he didn't bathe very often. He smelled badly. He also had kind of a hunchback a little bit, and his nose was pushed to the side because he had done like boxing, when he was younger as a sport. So he had his nose broken several times. And he didn't wash his cloak very often. And he didn't wear shoes or sandals very often. And so he appeared to be a rather, ugly character, perhaps even, not to equate the two things, but perhaps a homeless wanderer. And then he would engage somebody in a discussion who I'm sure they're a little bit, they feel somewhat superior to this person, even though, maybe they've seen it happen before, but then this kind of character comes out of him where he's, really thinking circles around them, and he just kind of destroys these people in public as people kind of gather to watch, because he's engaging people who are politicians, all the people I mentioned, and the teachers of the day. So maybe your parents are watching this guy they're paying a lot of money to teach their kids, and this rather unattractive, dirty, homeless man is apparently, although he was not homeless, just eviscerates this person that you're paying to teach your kids in a discussion. So this is the kind of Socrates that people would have seen, and he went to the places where people gathered. He went to the marketplaces in Athens, in particular the Agora, which is at the foot of the Acropolis, if you know, this kind of mesa-like mountain or whatever, in the middle, well, not in the middle of Athens, but in Athens, on top of which is the Parthenon, these temples that were in Athens. Okay, Socrates himself, though, he, not a whole lot is known about, well, I shouldn't say that, a whole lot is known about. The thing that we don't have from Socrates is any written words of his own. He didn't write anything down. So today, if you have just like the slightest little scandal in your life, you've got book publishers calling you up to write a book, right? And big money about that. Socrates didn't write anything down at all. So to think that we're still reading about him, or how much credibility he has as a person, as a philosopher, it is interesting to think that he never himself penned anything. It wasn't because he was illiterate. He just didn't record anything. So we're reliant upon other people to give us an account of Socrates' life and what he said. Can you think of anyone else who never wrote anything down and is still influential today? The big JC comes to mind right away. Yes, that's right. Yeah, what if we had a gospel according to Jesus, right? We'd probably just like say, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, thanks a lot, but the gospel according to Jesus. I would like trump everything else in. Yeah, I know that's what Luke said, but Jesus says, Jesus says that he said, right. Yeah, there's other people, I guess, it's not the most common thing. Usually people of fame and wisdom typically write things down themselves. There's three sources we have for Socrates. I'll start with, let's say this guy, Xenophon. Actually, a street in Tulsa named Xenophon. Do we know that? We're over in northwest Tulsa. Yeah. You know that big casino they built out there? They allow 18-year-olds in there, by the way. You know, just I'm not wanting to get anyone started on that, but you been out there, Bob? Yeah. At Osage Casino, they got a hotel out there and everything. That's in that area where this. Anyway, the street is called Xenophon. Xenophon was a general in the military, and there's actually two things that Xenophon wrote that we have today. He was an admirer of Socrates, so he was not. These were not. Well, the dialogue he has with Socrates is not a confrontational one at all. It's a very friendly discussion. And because he's a general, the question is one I've already been kind of using as an example. What is courage? Well, that would be important for a general to know. What is courage? Right. He also is present at Socrates' trial, and he writes an account of the trial. And as far as we know, he and Plato didn't really know each other, or maybe they knew of each other, but they didn't really know each other. Plato has his account of the trial. You have a copy of it in that other book you have. And what's interesting is their accounts of the trial, their written accounts of the trial, corroborate each other. You know what I mean when I say that? They mirror each other. They're very, I mean, they're not exactly word for word the same, but very close though, yeah? So it's like having a secondary source. You've got this main source, Plato, which is in the book you have, and you got another guy who was there who writes down remarkably similar account of the same thing. So it kind of validates Plato's account, which is the more read and more accepted account. But I've read both of them, and they're both, again, sometimes I forget which one I'm reading. But Xenophon, that's his role. So he writes down two things, a dialogue he had, and then this account of the trial. This other guy, Aristophanes. Aristophanes was a comic playwright. He wrote comedies. And he wrote a comedy called The Clouds. Apparently it's pretty popular. And one you can actually read this today if you want to read it. And the main character in this play called The Clouds was a man who just happened to be called Socrates. And Socrates makes all kinds of crazy claims, one of which is that he can walk in the air and walk on the clouds. It shows Socrates as someone who had no concern or interest in religion at all. It shows us Socrates who will teach anyone or talk to anyone as long as they'll pay him. And it shows us Socrates who intentionally and really with joy takes the weaker argument in a debate or in one of these discussions and enjoys making it the stronger argument, enjoys winning the debate, having started with the weaker argument. This is just kind of a play toy for him. It's just to kind of humiliate people, even by taking the weaker side of an argument. This was a comedy. This was a spoof, a parody. Because Socrates, it also tells us something about his how well known he was as he lived in Athens. That he was well known enough that a well-known playwright would write a play with the main character having his name. That it'd be funny. It wouldn't be that funny. People came to the play and didn't have any idea who Socrates was, and it'd be just like this annoying man, right? But knowing really what he was like, and or at least having some experience or seeing him or hearing about him, and then all of a sudden you've got this play which was well received. That makes it more funny. So it tells us something about his fame or infamy within Athens. That the play was successful. But it is meant to be, it is a comedy. It wasn't like Aristophanes all of a sudden wrote a biography, and made it into a play. It was meant to be funny. That's what Aristophanes always wrote. And what about, hey, can you think of any spoofs of like well-known people that we see today, either in movies or, yeah, SNL spoofs everybody. That's one thing I like about SNL. I've missed them recently, because no matter who's president, I remember back in the 70s, they voted for Carter, they were really harsh on Carter, and Dan Aykroyd played Jimmy Carter back then. Chevy Chase played Gerald Ford, and Gerald Ford slipped a couple of times, once coming down the steps of the Air Force One, and then once out in front of the White House on the ice, he slipped and fell. And so Chevy Chase's portrayal of Gerald Ford on the show was that he couldn't even stay standing. He would slip just standing still, like in the Oval Office, he would just fall down and, oh, I'm sorry, I slipped again. So they really, play up these little small faults, and then they make it into a big, that's part of the fun, I guess. And of course, who's Alec Baldwin, right, does the Trump, and I remember they had it was hard to tell who was who. Tina Fey played John McCain's running mate, the old governor of Alaska. What was her name? Sarah Palin. One time Sarah Palin showed up on the show, and I couldn't tell who was Sarah Palin, who was Tina Fey. Like, Tina Fey looked, I was crazy. But nobody would I hope, nobody would watch SNL and think, oh, that's actually just word for word. That's just what the president said. That's how we act. That's who he is. We all know that it's a parody of, right? Don't we? I hope we do. Yeah. Probably the difference between parody and right. So it would be, there was a movie that came out a number of years ago, and it was called True Colors. I'm not quite sure how the title fit in, but it was about a Southern governor. It never mentioned what state, or a Southern governor who was really, really talented with like kind of retail politics. He was running for president, and he was really good at like meeting people and shaking hands, and like really, people really felt like they really had like an encounter with, you know, a one-on-one encounter with this guy when they just shook hands even in a crowd with him. And he could electrify a crowd of people when he spoke in front of them. Any situation, blue collar, white collar, Wall Street, whatever, he could just turn them on and they would just be like, they're in his pocket, you know, and he had votes. And, but he had faults also. He was a womanizer, you know. His wife was really the brains behind the operation. He was just kind of the talent, you know. And the movie was not such a veiled like reference to Bill Clinton and his run for the presidency. And John Travolta played the Bill Clinton character. So if you want to know. Is he still around? His wife died, didn't she? Yeah, remember that? Just like over the summer. Kelly Preston. John Travolta, Pulp Fiction. You want to see that movie? No? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, and a Scientologist too.
Like the lead guy.
He and Tom Cruise were kind of yeah. But yeah, John Travolta was kind of the sane one, right? Tom Cruise sometimes acted a little crazy. All right, so that's Aristophanes. So as far as being a source for like what Socrates was really like, well, not really. However, here's the problem. Is a lot of the people who sat in judgment of Socrates literally sat and their vote was going to count for guilty or not guilty, condemn or not condemn at his trial, really only knew Socrates through this play. They had seen the play, but they hadn't really ever encountered Socrates before. Many of them had, but a lot of them hadn't. So this portrayal of Socrates, no one can really know how much, might have influenced their vote. And we know that because Socrates calls Aristophanes out by name and talks about this play, The Clouds. And he knows that a lot of people are probably going to judge him based on how he appears in this play. So we know it was a concern of Socrates, probably was actually a real concern. The biggest source and the most accepted one is Plato. And that's, of course, who wrote the book that you have there. And Plato, of course, was his, most devoted disciple. And he shows Socrates as somebody who despises the sophists, and politicians, and someone who does have a concern for the gods, concern for the soul and the gods. So kind of the opposite a little bit of Aristophanes. He'll teach anybody. He doesn't take money. Why would he not take money? Like the sophists do.
Is he like learning from them?
Is he what?
No.
Can you repeat what you said?
Knowledge to be accessible to everyone.
Yes. I mean, I'm sure you believe that, but I didn't hear what you said.
Oh, I said, is he like learning from them while they're learning?
Yeah, like you're getting closer there. Think about what was his interpretation of what the Oracle of Delphi said. What was it about him? You're the wisest man. What can they mean by that? What was his conclusion?
So much water.
Yeah. Well, no. What was it? He knew that he knew nothing. And if that's all he can teach, really, that's not really worth a lot. He doesn't have any knowledge. So he can't really teach anybody. In fact, when people call him a teacher, he always kind of pushes off that title. It's like, no, I'm not a teacher. I could not be a teacher. I don't know anything. I can't teach anybody anything. So he refused to take money from people. we really don't know how he survived, quite honestly. His wife apparently had money. He was married. She had some money, so then they lived off that. But maybe people made donations to him that, hey, this is not for teaching. This is just for you, just for the heck of it, I guess. We don't know. Somehow he made it to be 70 something. So, but he didn't make that money writing books or by teaching students. We know that much. But this is what we have from Plato. This is the account, and really the most kind of accepted view. As historians, I say, and scholars of Socrates would say that Plato, of course, is the most reliable source. And Plato writes, I could be off this number, but he writes about 35 dialogues, Socratic dialogues, where he engages with somebody. Could be all different people, but good. There are some discrepancies in the, even within what we call the Platonic Socrates, Platonic being the adjective of Plato. There are some discrepancies, but Plato's writing over a long period of time. He's writing from the time Socrates is still alive until the time so maybe over a 40-year period or so of time. And in that time, Plato becomes a philosopher himself, a recognized philosopher, even as he's alive, and teacher as well. And he kind of starts developing his own philosophy. And Plato had so much respect for Socrates and maybe thought so little of himself. I don't know about that, but he believed people would be talking about Socrates 1,000, 2,000 years from now, but he didn't think people would be talking about him. So he very craftily put his words into Socrates' teaching through his own writing, though. He inserted his own ideas and made it look like Socrates said this. Now, whether that's honorable or not, I don't know, but I don't know if Socrates would have necessarily disagreed with what Plato said. We don't know. But so that's part of the problem. But there's a couple of discrepancies. One is, we're not going to read it, but the last book of this book, the last chapter of this book, is after Socrates has been condemned, and he has to sit for 30 days there in jail to wait for his execution. And at the trial, he pretty much is not sure what happens to the soul after death. He tells the court this. But on the day of his execution, though, he's been in prison for 30 days. The whole dialogue, the whole discussion in the last chapter is all about what happens to the soul after death. So either he became like enlightened in those 30 days. Apparently there are not a lot of atheists on death row, right, in prison. You know, they find somebody. They find God or Allah or somebody, right? Krishna, somebody. But maybe that's what happened. But actually, that last story was written some 30 years later, and that's more Plato, we know, because it's more reflective of what comes out of the Republic, the other work, the Republic, that we won't be reading, but than it is of Socrates himself. Anyway, let me see here. One other thing I was going to say. Yeah, Plato. Okay. One other thing, there is a problem, to say historically, about relying upon someone who's not necessarily an unbiased source. Plato had really a lot invested in what Socrates said. Socrates was put to death, and he wants to promote these teachings and build upon them. So possibly people could argue very easily that Plato had a vested interest in keeping these teachings, in a certain direction or a certain line. So he could have recorded these dialogues in a way that, might have reflected something a bit differently than what happened. Maybe he didn't show all the times he flew into a rage, and did something crazy, or that Socrates acted in some ungentlemanly way. We don't ever see that, but you could make the argument that Plato would have kind of edited that out, like that. Okay, I was going to record this dialogue, but I'm just going to start writing everything down and I'll burn this paper. And yeah, that's easy to do. Of course, you could make the same, and I'm not being blasphemous by saying someone else could make the same argument about the Gospels. You could say, well, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John had a lot on the line, like their lives were on the line. They're promoting this guy the Romans put to death. And they were, weren't afraid to execute other people who had followed Jesus. And these are kind of well-known followers of Jesus. So them writing about it, they might want to write it in a certain way. If you're going to be more cynical about it, they want to write it in a certain way that might make Jesus appear maybe differently than he was. I'm just saying someone could make that argument. I'm not making that argument, but when you rely upon devoted disciples, and that's what Plato probably would have called himself, not a student, but a disciple of Socrates. Devoted disciples, it's maybe better to have a third-party account, historically speaking. But this is what we have, though. This is what we have. If you don't have a first-person account, then maybe an unbiased third-party source is a better, more reliable source for something. Yeah. I was reading, I might have been myself over there, I was reading a biography of John Paul II this summer, and it was written by a reporter for the newspaper in Rome, L'Osservatore Romano, I think, and then also one of the Watergate reporters, one of the two guys, the other guy, not the one in the news now, but Carl Bernstein. And it was excellent. It was excellent biography, very balanced, and the good and the bad. There were a couple of negatives there, but I might find that to be more reliable than maybe kind of a devoted disciple writing about him. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I don't know what time it is, but it's a good place to stop. So Wednesday we'll have a little review then on Zoom. All right.
Wait, so when the Platonic thing is just like him putting his words into Socrates' script?
Yeah, there are some sections of the Platonic writings where scholars look at certain parts that he said, and then compare it to other writings Plato did on his own, and they can see that, this is him putting his own words in Socrates' mouth. Yeah. On Wednesday, I'll be giving you an assignment out of the smaller book. So if you want to take it home with you, you can. If not, you can pick it up on Monday. But actually, I'll tell you what, I'm going to give it to you now. Read this first dialogue, this first book. It's not very long. It's pages, 17, just a few lines. So 17 pages. It's called Euthyphro, and it's the first story here. There's only 4 stories in this book. It's the shortest, I think, of the 4. Euthyphro was a sophist. Euthyphro is on his way to court for a different trial, a different situation, his own personal situation. And Socrates is on his way to trial for his supposed crimes. And, you'll find out what the charges are against him. And they meet each other. Socrates knows that his life's on the line. This is a capital offense he's looking at. And so he might not ever leave the courtroom again, or the courthouse. But this is really it's really an excellent example of the Socratic method. So as you go through it, you can find those steps like, someone claims to know something. Socrates gets excited about it. The guy gives his definition. Socrates unravels that somehow. The guy tries again, and just kind of repeats that middle part over and over again. He tries again. He tries a third time, a fourth time, maybe more. And in the end, he admits he doesn't know. He agrees to talk about it more. Yeah, all the steps are there. But anyway, take a look at that, please, for Thursday. I want to talk about that in class on Thursday.
What page is it?
It is 1 to 17. Just the first book of this our first chapter of this book here. Did not, okay. Then let me check this one out to you. Are you sure?
It's a different color.
It's a different, some others had different cover,
Yeah.
but the picture is the same though.
Yeah.
Okay, then I didn't give you this one, huh? Let me check my, I'm gonna check my record then. Let me see here. Maybe, because maybe I wrote one down for you. Okay, come get this one then. 42. There you go. All right. So please read that by the time I see you again.
Thursday.
Thursday.